mechanical issues. We all know how that goes. So I'm gonna cover for him until he gets here, hopefully about midway through the meeting. But we do have, Zach with A2S and then Griffin, one of our water resource engineers as well. So, with that, I will go ahead and kick things off. Thanks everyone for being here. So just to go through our agenda before we jump in, we'll start with public comment and approval of minutes as always. And then I will provide a quick update on community engagement efforts that we have, had since the last meeting and what we've heard at those. Zach will then, present on some of the alternatives from the last integrated water resource plan, basically the ones that we didn't cover last month. And then we'll go over some other alternatives, basically ideas that the city has, for alternatives both on the supply side and the conservation side. And then we'll touch on our water rights portfolio. There was a question about that last meeting, so we're gonna talk about that a little bit. And give you kind of a preview of the next meeting. I'll just lead with, we have about 30 slides and 3 hours. So there's a lot of time today for discussion. So just keep that in mind as we go. We can take that however we'd like. I think we could certainly stop and discuss along the way. But know that we'll probably have time at the end to come back and revisit anything you'd like to discuss in more detail. All right, so with that.
Quick question on the agenda, the October meeting preview. We have the date for the October meeting, is it the 15th?
You checked the third Wednesday.
So it's like totally a personal reason. We said I was trying to sort out some travel, which just takes forever.
Well, thanks for considering it.
Yeah, it's the 15th.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
Yep.
It sounds like it wouldn't be. It must be, is the first of Wednesday?
Yep.
Must be, okay. Great. All right. So public comment. So this is the time to comment on any non-agenda matter falling within the scope of the Integrated Water Resources Planning Committee. There will also be time in conjunction with each agenda item for public comment relating to that item if a decision is being made, but you may only speak once per topic. Please note the committee cannot take action on any item which does not appear on the agenda. All persons addressing the committee shall speak in a civil and courteous manner, and members of the audience should be respectful of others. Please state your name and place of residence in an audible tone and limit your comments to 3 minutes. Do we have any public comment? You should have all received the minutes in your agenda packet. So if anyone would like to discuss those, we can do that. Otherwise, if we'd like to go ahead and adopt those, we could, or approve those, I should say, we could do that as well.
Sure. I had no changes. I make a motion to approve.
Okay.
5 seconds.
The only small change, which I don't think is substantive, is my last name has 2 T's.
Oh, okay, sorry about that.
No, you're fine. That's critical. Not substantive. Otherwise, they look good.
Great. Danica? I'm good. Good, okay.
Yes.
I appreciate all the detail in that slide, especially with the links to where and the topic of the discussion took place where we go back to that.
The first part you said was you appreciate more detail.
Oh, no, I appreciate the level.
Oh, you appreciate the level. Okay, great, okay. Good
It's
to know.
really nice to have the timestamp associated with the recording. That's thank you.
Yeah, I appreciate that, having not done.
Yeah, okay, great, good. And all of the meeting recordings and minutes are on the Engage Bozeman page for this. In case like any member of the public asks or anything, they're all there. We upload those as fast as we can after, so.
One other quick question about that, just delicious. I know that I saw the recordings in the notes, but I wondered about the slides. Is there a place where there's electronic slides, or I missed the slides from last?
Oh, sure.
Had to set in virtually.
There is not, I could definitely send you those. And if the group feels that's important, I think we could certainly make those available on the Engage Bozeman page as well. It's easy to do that, so we can.
It'd be great to have the digital access to the slides in
Sure.
general.
Yeah, we can do that as well. Yeah, absolutely. Thanks for the suggestion. I think we're going with 3 minutes approval. Tim? With approval of the minutes?
Yes.
Yes.
A second.
Yeah, okay. Oh, that's right. Yeah, yes. Okay, great. All Community engagement update. So since our last meeting, we're still really focused on just sort of participating in community tabling events. Now that the summer season's winding down, those will be winding down as well. But we participated in Story Under the Stars, Catapalooza, and then another farmer's market since our last meeting. And we introduced this new kind of interactive way to just engage folks. So what you're looking at on the screen is something we set up on the table. We have a fishbowl with different tickets, and we're just asking folks what water-related matter is their top priority for the community, recognizing many people have many. We're just trying to get a sense of what folks are thinking about, what they may be concerned about. And so what we found is that water quality and drought resilience seem to be the most, I guess the top priority for most people, followed by cost of water, and then lastly, aging infrastructure. We've not actually had anyone submit a note card with their own concerns, though we do have that option on the table as well.
Can I ask something really quick?
Yeah.
I don't have, if there's the printout of the slides, I don't think I.
You didn't get them?
Yeah. Sorry, I'm trying.
There's a spring pile.
Oh, over there. Thank you, sorry.
No, thanks for asking. And so what we've heard, aside from the ticket activity, what we've been hearing from folks, just as they engage, in kind of just conversations with us is, concerns about the cost of Canyon Ferry for those folks that are aware that we, did feasibility analysis on that project. We've also heard suggestions to import water from the Yellowstone. We heard another suggestion. So I had said that last time, and this was another suggestion for that. And to capture and store spring runoff in some capacity within our existing watersheds where we, already rely on our supplies. And we've also heard, more support for conservation as well. So we'll shift gears here, and Zach will present on some of the remaining alternatives that we did not cover last time from the 2013 integrated plan.
Jessica, can I ask a quick question?
Yes.
No,
I thought I heard you say, so some people had comments on Canyon Ferry, and Yellowstone. You say there was some other option proposed?
Oh, sorry, I was trying to explain that, last month I had mentioned that we heard about importing water from Yellowstone, and I was trying to clarify that we heard that again.
Okay.
Yep, thanks.
I just wanted to invite, and it could be a separate conversation, meeting with you, Jessica, but, the Gallatin Water Collaborative would love to have a presentation about, the IWRP.
Okay.
Monthly meeting, it feels like appropriate timing for community, or as part of the community engagement process at all.
Okay,
We'll be also talking about the dam project, so generally water availability, the dam project, and then the water budget, the DNRC will be working on in the next couple of years, so it would be a good chance to incorporate IWRP into that whole sort of community water strategy.
yeah, that's great, yeah,
We can talk about it.
that sounds great, yeah, thanks for the email. And there was Zach, and Zach, you can use the bins.
Yep. When did you move the slides?
This morning.
Okay,
Right,
maybe some slight, last minute version. So yeah, we'll go through the remaining, alternatives that were presented in the 2013 IWRP. For those who missed last time, we went over about half of them, with about 10 of them. They are all fairly well summarized in Appendix C of the IWRP. There's little cut sheets for each alternative. And we'll just kind of, so like Jess said, we have quite a bit of time, so I'm not gonna go through these quickly. However, I don't have a lot of information on each slide for them.
Before we get started,
Yeah,
can I make a request? I'm a very visual person, and while I've been in the valley a long time, geographically, I understand where everything is, but could we go ahead and have the GIS group make up a map and kind of showing our valley? And I've got kind of some limits of what I would suggest that they are with regards to kind of the southern boundary being Highlight Reservoir, the northern boundary being the north edge of city of Belgrade, the eastern boundary being Mystic Lake, and then the western boundary being the Gallatin River, right due west of Belgrade. And then that kind of captures kind of the area that I think that we're primarily dealing with. And then the second one would be not including Highlight Reservoir, but bringing it just to the kind of the valley floor. But then being able to go ahead and show where like the water treatment plant is, where Lyman Creek is, and then have all of the ditches, canals, and creeks, and that way we've got a great visual of, as we were looking at all these alternatives as to distances and kind of, and then also show, and like, I can bring this to whoever's attention as far as some of the details that I think would be in there, but kind of the existing boundaries of what the city of Bozeman is right now, and then what the city of Belgrade boundaries are. So as we start looking at options as to, you know, with Alan's work that he's done on high yield wells and potential areas and such, and lower yield wells that probably would be more likely to be used. That way we actually can kind of, as we're talking about these things, that's just the way my brain works. And I think that also, if we're bringing this to the forefront of the public, they have an idea of what are we dealing with? Because I was surprised I didn't see it in the 2013 IWRP as far as any sort of map. So I was kind of searching for that. So I think that would be great for me and probably for a lot of people too.
Yeah, that's a great suggestion. I think we can do all those things on one map, but we'll definitely do what we can, and maybe we could chat more about that to make sure I'm covering what you would like, and I'll see what we can actually create.
And I'm thinking, you know, I've done a lot of map work with my engineering, and just having like an 11:17 version that we could have in front of us, and would have enough detail so that you can actually see all what we need to see. And I just want to mention, I was a little confused with regard to Lyman Creek. I did not realize that Lyman Creek was actually a groundwater well source. And in my mind, I was trying to figure out, well, how is the water from Lyman Creek getting all the way to the water treatment plant? So I didn't see that. Maybe I missed it in the IWRP, but that's something that we need, you know, maybe even on the map, you know, can kind of show that that's groundwater well. The only way I ended up finding out that that source is a groundwater well was going to the city website.
It's a spring box technically, not a groundwater well.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Well, actually, on the website, it says it's a groundwater well, so.
So a spring box, a developed spring would be considered groundwater,
Okay.
a source of groundwater, yeah. At DNRC it is anyway.
The spring is basically the head of Lyman Creek, so. It captures most of the water now, but not all of it. So
Sure.
spring still flows.
Yeah, I was just a little confused too, because it was indicating that it does, because it's groundwater, it doesn't need any treatment. It has,
Pipe down and then disinfected with chlorine. And then
so where's it piped to?
there's a storage reservoir, I don't know, about 3/4 of the way down the canyon, down Lyman Canyon.
Down Lyman?
Yeah.
Okay. And so this, again, I'm getting this off the city website. It said it didn't need to be filtered.
Correct.
With that at all?
Really high quality water.
I can add a little bit to that, because, I mean, the way the DEQ, the Public Water Supply folks, years ago when this came up, you know, they looked at all the public water supplies, determined whether any of them were groundwater sources that were under the influence of surface water, meaning that could be contamination in them. So I think they were all looked at pretty rigorously. And in some of the cases, the question if they do like particulate analysis, other than testing, but you know, if they look at something like Lyman Spring where they can see it clearly coming right out of the bedrock and it's not testing positive for coliform bacteria, anything like that, it's no turbidity, then they would eventually just classify it as groundwater.
Okay.
So So that probably was looked at in the past, and there's probably a report on that. But they did, usually there was somebody that looked at it, not just assumed that it was safe. So
Sure, no, yeah, if it's,
that deep.
if it's steady water, it's gonna be tested rigorously, I assume.
And I have been up there, it's really nice water, it comes out of Madison limestone, so it's water quality wise, probably some of the best water in town.
Nice. How is it actually brought into the city water system?
Gravity pipe,
And so it has enough pressure to.
yeah, cause it's up on that south flank of the bridges, so it's quite a bit. In fact, they have to put pressure reduction valves on the line to get the water down the hill. Where they want to put in tanks.
Okay.
If you guys want.
Sure. Where's going?
Go ahead, Nate. I think if you share your screen, it should end up on the TVs in here.
That coming across?
We can hear you. We
Can
can't
you-
see your screen.
Oh, okay.
Sorry. There we go. Okay.
You got this?
Yep, we can see you now.
Okay. To give this a little bit of perspective on the far south end here, this is the road that goes up to Bridger. I think the Lyman Creek drainage, if you can see my cursor, is up in either this fork of the canyon or over here. It's hard to actually find the spring box, but the water comes down. I think it's this one over here, and it comes down in it's collected up here in a spring box. It comes down in a transmission pipeline, and that transmission pipeline delivers the water to this rectangle right here. That is it's a covered concrete trapezoidal shaped tank. And then there's a treatment building located right here, kind of to the south of that tank, that is where the chemicals are stored, and basically the equipment there to dose chlorine into the water to provide a level of disinfection consistent with what the sourdough plant provides on the south end of the community. And then there's a transmission line. As I zoom out here, I know my video might be lagging a little here. But the transmission line comes down into the community. It crosses the interstate corridor and the railroad corridor, and then has the ability to enter the city's distribution system kind of on that northwest or northeast side of the community. Normally, I guess under kind of like average, demand conditions, it does just provide, adequate working pressure to pressurize a good share of the northern end of the community. But there is a Pear Street pump station that's located kind of up in that northeast side of town. That pump station was recently improved. And, so during peak demand, that pump station can, elevate the pressure to boost the system line from the Lyman system into the distribution system. I guess Griffin, you might have a good understanding. I can see you with the way the owl is looking. Do you have anything to add with respect to anything I just said on the Lyman system?
Only thing I would add is that prior to the transmission being getting to Pear Street, it does provide distribution support along the way. But yeah, that's a great summary, Nate.
Thanks, Dave.
You're welcome.
I actually have a photo of the spring box looking, it's not amazing, but looking into the spring box coming up here. So yeah, anything else before? Keep going?
One other general question, so, in going through some of the issues that we've already gone through in more detail, I've been generating questions. What's the best way, and I don't want to go ahead and bring up these questions in this group, but what's the best way to go ahead and bring it to the table to just say, here's some additional questions? Should I put it in a letter format, email it? And so to who, to the group? So if you could just get back to me on that, is what you think is the best way to address that, that would be great.
Reach out to that.
Okay, so, IU again stands for, integrated utility. 6 is just the 6th integrated utility alternative that was developed previously. And integrated utility alternatives largely surround reusing, water reclamation facility effluent, to work. This one specifically was looking at reuse for industrial users. This one didn't really move forward that much in 2013. I don't anticipate it will move very far forward in this update either. There just aren't a lot of industrial users in the valley that would benefit from this.
Can you describe what an industrial user included?
Sure, like cooling or mine operations or yeah, anything under the sun.
Okay, great, so we don't have industrial users.
And based on how the city does its customer rate classes, which is a little different, we do have an industrial rate class, they have one customer is their goal. So they're considered industrial just based on the scale and like they have a lot of cooling, based on like their production plant. But we just like, yeah, that, so.
So they do use water for cooling. They use water at an industrial scale, but it's not enough to justify that.
Correct. So if you were to look at like total citywide consumption among those customer classes, our industrial class uses 2%, which is one place, but it wouldn't move the needle a lot on additional supply. If we were to offset.
Is there anything to, like, thinking about these as we think about 50 years of growth and keeping something like this on the table or in like a rotating bank of options that needs to be engaged with in 30 years when we do have some sort of gigantic building that needs a lot of cooling?
That's a
Other
great,
parts of the state are seeing.
sure, that's a great question. Yeah, and, it's a 50-year plan, but of course we'll be revisiting it. And I think that this group has an opportunity to, even if there is a specific thing you'd like revisited more often, you could outline that in your recommendation to our commission, and say that like this one should be revisited every X years, or if and when our industrial customer base grows or something like that. I think, you could get creative with that.
Maybe I'll just interject one thing here. A2S was involved in a project where an industrial entity was looking to, they were agriculturally water intensive processing. And they didn't, for their uses of, major water needs, it didn't have to be to drinking water standards. And so the project that we completed basically was taking wastewater effluent, treating it, to a quality that the industrial user wanted, and then they in turn use that water in their processing capabilities, and then that water is then returned back to the wastewater plant for treatment. And so, it basically is like a second use of wastewater, or the water that the municipality has is just used for industrial purposes instead of for, residential, commercial type use.
I had a question and a comment too. Just curious as to whether or not has the city talked with Dairy Gold about these. I mean, I know this kind of got sidelined because there just really wasn't much for users, but if they're 2% of the base, I'm just wondering if they're even interested in something like this, or if there's any communications or costs.
Not to my knowledge, what I can ask other folks that have been around longer and see if, if there's anything that I'm unaware of there.
And then my only comment was that, when I first started looking at this one and thinking about pros and cons, I actually got a little confused because it says, for industrial use, but then it says and or by water users in the Galvin Valley that may have an interest in that in exchange for a lease of water rights. So then I started thinking of that agricultural use. But then you go to the next one and it's kind of gives me that more. So kind of wondering if for the next report should clarify that. Because it sounds to me like what you're saying there is that somebody that did have a water right somewhere else in the valley, it could be an ag right, could trade that somehow and use this water. And the city would have that water right, you would buy or lease it, so.
And that is one of the alternatives, yeah, it's just, well, it's a little vague in the writing there, but I think IU 3 or 4.
Yeah,
If
just,
we're-
yeah, so that's what I was kind of getting at, is it kind of seemed like IU6 was kind of touching on some of the other alternatives too, so I just got a little confused as to how I would select that one.
Sure.
So it might be cleaner to just say for industrial use and then deal with any agricultural use, trading the water rates and a different alternative.
Agreed.
Is Darigold essentially the only industrial user on underneath percentage?
Yes, based on how we classify our customer classes for, our rate studies and billing structure, they're the only industrial customer.
Okay, so they are the 1 or 2%.
Yeah.
So gone are the days of having the pecan rate,
Oh, yeah. Mhm. Yeah. that
which
was-
would have been a big user.
Sure, yeah, absolutely.
The only other thing I thought of when I looked at this one is that, when this report was written, there wasn't much going on, but I kind of view this one and the next one as being most useful for something in the area of the wastewater treatment plant, so you don't have to move that water very far. And now, I don't know what all the plans are for development along the north side of the freeway there, but looks like in the future, there's much more of a chance for some commercial industrial activity that would be close to the treatment plant that maybe you could even plan, on the pre-built side to work those systems out, but which just made me think that maybe it's worth looking at a little bit more in this round. Yeah, thinking about what's gonna be going on by these changes out there.
I guess one of the buzzwords in the industry right now is data centers. Some data centers will use water on a closed loop basis, but some will use it on a pass-through basis for cooling. And so, you could always consider, some type of industrial reuse for, supporting a data center that's interested in, locating into the Gallatin Valley area.
Great dumb idea then.
I think there are limitations on Northwestern Energy's side of things to support data centers. That's what there's been a couple articles about that, but. Yeah.
Well, that does remind me, one other question I was gonna ask is whether or not city knows, do we have any businesses out there that do have like open loop cooling systems where they're using a fair amount of water on a commercial basis, but maybe not industrial for cooling purposes?
I feel like that's a close we're looking into more.
Like geothermal heating and cooling?
Yeah, it could be geothermal or it could be for cooling equipment, but my thought was just that maybe, going forward, the city should require that those systems be closed loop systems. So they're not consuming water.
Yeah, that's on our radar. And yes, a lot of the systems, I can't speak to Darigold specifically, though their use may indicate it's single pass cooling. But, yeah, a lot of the cooling systems are single pass cooling. It's cheap and it's fast and it cools quickly. So yeah. Yeah, so I think that would be a great alternative to explore for kind of the demand reduction side of things,
Right.
additional cooling regulations. Yeah.
Would that involve zoning or, how would the city get involved with stepping in and demanding that each use one or the other?
It would, if we, yeah, it would be a change in the infrastructure, yeah. And then in terms of how the policy would work, there may be issues at the state level, in Montana, ARM, but, like the Montana state law and then rule. So we'd have to figure that part out first, right? The policy implications. If there aren't any with the existing building code, which is where this probably would be if there are issues, we could likely, yes, do it in our zoning code. That's sort of how we approached our landscaping restrictions. We were able to do that because it's not part of the building code. But we would have to kind of flush that out, before we were able to. But that would be the logical place.
The last reused one is groundwater recharge, so this would require changing the city's permit. So they discharge to the East Gallatin now. This would require them to change that permit and discharge to groundwater, which would potentially allow them to mitigate water rights in like groundwater, for example, extraction in another part of the valley.
Mitigate new consumption
Yeah,
or adverse effect identified resulting,
sorry, yeah, not a new water right.
yeah.
And this image is showing there are actually rapid infiltration beds just west of the wharf. That's all city-owned property.
Water reclamation facility,
Sorry, yeah.
If you notice when I looked at this one, that, you know, in the previous report, there were comments that, or that there were significant issues with those, and I don't know if that remains the case. It just says it would take quite a considerable work to rehabilitate, but if they, is it still the case? Has there been any change in those infiltration beds?
Gosh, I think that's, I don't believe so.
No.
I think that's still the case.
Yeah.
And I think the legal hurdle would be even more challenging than the that challenge.
Yeah, well, on both this one and the one before, that was one of the notes that I had made, is that it seems like where you really do much many evaluation, you get a solid answer on how the water rate process would work in that.
Yeah, and DEQ permitting
Right.
as well.
Among the two, I thought this one maybe has more chance to be left on the table for future use out of two industrial versus small.
Okay, shifting to the water supply development category of projects or alternatives. We went through 1 through 5 last month. Now we'll go to the rest of them, 6 and 9 maybe. The 6th was something called the Solar project. Solar was a private entity formed by some local developers and other folks. I don't know all the details in the valley that proposed creating an offline reservoir that would draw from Farmers Canal and some other canals and or maybe even Gallatin directly. And in order to sell that water for municipal or ag users. That project, to my understanding, kind of just fizzled out because the private entities that were involved stopped pursuing it. I think the city's perspective is to continue considering some type of this or some version of this as an alternative. Maybe not exactly the solar project, but generally the concept of optimizing the use of canal rights detrits. Again, legal challenges, physical challenges, obviously.
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of, we just mentioned a little bit ago that there's public interest in storing some of that runoff for later use. So this alternative was addressing that pretty directly. There's quite a few benefits to keeping this one. I think, scratch off solar, but it may be, they have a specific place they were looking at a reservoir. You can look at different options, but what I see as the big advantage is that you've got a good-sized canal to do this right. So you've got a good canal, and it's high up in the system. So elevation-wise, it works good for water distribution. And you could, you could capture a spring runoff for the gallons. So seems like it's still a good option to leave on the table. And I think there is more and more interest there's issues with new surface impoundments, but I think there's gonna be more and more push towards that, I guess.
Point out that it could also be used again for that mitigation water. It doesn't necessarily need to be supply, like new supply, it could be used to mitigate groundwater.
Yep.
And the city has done some additional studies on kind of capturing that peak spring runoff a few years back. Brian Keeson, who will be here soon, is more knowledgeable about that study. WC seven, it's similar to one of the previous ones, which was sourdough storage in the sourdough basin. I think the difference is that one of them is more traditional dam reservoir and one is more kind of distributed storage throughout the canyon, which I know we talked about last time quite a bit with beaver analogs and things like that. So this one apply up to 6,000 acre feet. So Brian Houston again will talk about the city's water rights, but we do have on paper we have a water reservoir storage right in the Sourdough Canyon that is for 6,000 acre feet. So this is like the lowest hanging fruit from a legal perspective to attack and expand water rights, water supply. Again, could be used for mitigation, doesn't necessarily have to be developing new supply in Sourdough.
I still kind of like this one. And I think, my comment, I think it is addressed in there. I just don't know if it's as clear as that. I mean, I think the consensus remains the same, that restoring the dam is out. So that's not gonna happen. The discussion kind of went on to doing something in the watershed. So you could do the beaver dam mimicry type of thing, but the other option, which I think was discussed at the previous meetings, was building several smaller impoundments. That would probably be, because it'll be bigger than just a beaver pond necessarily, but a series of smaller impoundments so that any one issue with the dam could be addressed. You can shut that one off or something, and you're not creating a huge new hazard, but creating more storage than you can. I guess the way I'm looking at it is like beaver mimicry type approach would be really good for storing that water and for maintaining in-stream flows maybe later into the season. That little alternative would potentially provide some surface water storage too, so.
Yeah.
I guess the recommendation would be to clarify those options a little bit.
Anybody have a counter opinion of why maybe poke a hole or two in this? Or does everybody kind of feel like,
About the option as a whole.
I think it's just important to remember that, the water rate change process that would, or permitting process that would be required for alternatives like this, like do present a lot of challenges. That are more obvious as you like really dig into what you're changing, but these are not easy changes to make administratively.
low hanging fruit is a relative term?
Right, yeah,
How does DNRC view like beaver mimicry projects? So where you're not really, you're modifying the riparian habitat, but
the short of it is that we don't. We don't have a well-established process for natural storage in general or nature-based solutions for looking at those types of distributed water storage projects or restoration efforts. I personally really like them, just because I think a distributed network of something like BDAs or those restoration efforts are really great at addressing like the environmental criterion that we've been discussing. But on DNRC's side, ponds are different. Ponds, are really easily measurable, they're mappable, their extent is discrete. We just haven't built out that BDA or like nature-based solution storage policy side yet.
yeah, and I don't really envision any problems with the way we're doing it now.
Yeah.
But I think, if I understand what you're saying, is if they started looking at something like maybe like 3 or 4 larger impoundments, then that would be a whole different story.
That would be different, yeah. So the thing with BD, if like the purpose of using those nature-based or like, more deformable structures, whatever, to impound water for mitigation, like, I don't even know how you'd start to go about, because the whole point of mitigating new uses of water, new consumption of water is that you're offsetting those uses during the times when adverse effect has been identified as happening. So you have to be able to show that you're measurably like offsetting that new use. It's different with permitting, but, so yeah, that's why ponds would be, in my opinion, easier, but not easy.
Yeah, well, in this case too, it would be a little unique because, I mean, in theory, if there was no geotechnical reason, the city would be allowed to rebuild Mystic Dam, right, and store the water behind that. That would not be a water rate change, would it?
Yeah, that's what I was wondering, if we already had
They
the
have a
water.
storage rate, which is kind of what we're trying to capture here. They just had to temporarily not use it because they decided to use the dam for safety reasons, so. If that's the case, then. Does it matter where in the drainage you store that water?
Yes.
For that water rate?
Yes, to some degree. I mean, it gets complicated really quickly.
Yeah.
It is somewhat easier if, and I don't have the abstract in front of me, if that is a decreed abstract with a storage right component. But that decree is also gonna speak to sort of the location of that, and I think, it gets complicated in terms of, would you have an adverse effect depending on where you store that water and all those sorts of situations.
Is there a scenario where if you don't use it, you lose it?
Not necessarily.
In Montana water law, like at large, there is an abandonment statute. And it's just a fundamental like tenet of Western water law and general forfeiture. But again, yeah, it's super complex, like how that actually plays out in different scenarios.
Specifically for municipalities and we covered in the abandonment statute, how cities are able to basically, I mean, at its most simple level, and I'm grossly oversimplifying it, if not abandoned, because of the future plans of growth. Like getting right up to a bunch of very toxic.
It's gonna be so fast.
That's good. Yeah. I guess if I was gonna poke any hole in this one, you know, the way I'm thinking of it, the beaver mimicry approach. The biggest flaw with that is that what it would really do would probably be to give you more late season flow in the creek, to the treatment plant, which is not when you need it, right? Or at least not as much. But that then leads me to think, well, what if you did have, let's say you made those changes and you have an extra so many CFS for several months in the fall and into early winter because of that return flow. Could that then just be run through the system, and could the city just add additional storage tanks for capacity? Maybe that would be a small number and it wouldn't matter, but some way to use that water later in the season, which is gets another little piece of damage.
I think the value to just those restoration efforts is that, they really contribute to a healthier watershed.
Oh, yeah.
And watershed health is like, is tied probably to a more robust municipal system, or, I mean, a more stable supply over time, even if that water isn't being directly captured or like measured and captured later. But I think there is value in general in promoting watershed health without necessarily having to tie like use of that, an assignment of that water somewhere else.
No, I totally agree. I mean, that would be the big benefit of the beaver mimicry type approach would be the environmental impacts and it's positive.
Yeah, just overall resiliency, kind of like a resiliency project.
Yeah.
So this actually goes into a question that I had written down before. So this was kind of presented as in the IWRP 2013, that the city was going to go ahead and inquire about, the formal application to this. So back in 2013, this was kind of on the table for 6,000 acre feet. Did the city ever pursue this at any level? Or was it just simply nothing done?
When Brian's here, you can speak more, Griffin, sorry.
Yeah, Brian's probably the most seen on this, but to my knowledge, the beaver dam analog concept has been studied since the 2013 hour. And there has been some findings on that. I don't believe any substantive work was done on kind of the or the smaller comments further up the drainage. We've kind of been in the city's capital plans in the past and been moved back. I don't think any progress has actually been made to date on that.
But in terms of securing that 6,000 acre foot, right?
Yeah, there's, I don't want to speak too much to this, because there's been some, ongoing legal work on this front between the city and the Forest Service. But that's, I believe, being worked out right now. I'll let Brian speak to that once he's here. Yeah.
Okay. Moving on. Highlight share purchasing. So this would be purchasing additional shares from the ag users on Highlight. The supply is 3,600 acre feet, which is just the remaining shares available, well, not available, the remaining shares that are owned by other users of reservoir. And as the city said, this has always been kind of a high priority for them to seek additional shares when available. And I believe continues to be a high priority.
And it, in fact, happened between the 13 and present day. Those some shares were purchased.
I'm
I lost a bet over that, so I remember
I was just gonna ask first, I couldn't remember, I'm trying to find the terminology here, but it talks about there's like a penalty calculation built in there, or a water loss. I couldn't remember what that was all about. Do you?
There's lots.
Yeah,
Well, it's not, yeah, trying to find the right terminology here.
The storage.
explain that, I don't know the history and maybe people know.
No, shrinkage, they call it a shrinkage factor. So in the calculations for the water rates, they show this is what the city has, this is what they have with the shrinkage factor, and I couldn't remember what that shrinkage factor was, but then as I read through here, it sounds like maybe a big part of that is loss of, like, so you have an irrigator that's got a canal, comes out into the valley. Does he get his share of water at his point of use? And is that just ditch loss? Or does, I mean, say 3 CFS gets diverted for his right, and he only gets 2.
I think it's a combination of.
Maybe that's what that shrinkage factor is. I wasn't sure if it was that or pipe loss or what.
I think it's a combination of ditch loss and actual physical, perceived or whatever, physical loss between the dam and the mouth of the canyon.
And probably evaporation off the surface.
Sure. And
Okay, so yeah, you really can take that thought.
Can somebody speak to what I understand is a sort of a mixing and blending of what essentially is storage water in the reservoir in addition to surface water rights from flowing out of the reservoir and how those are separated or considered in regards to this?
So this is specifically to storage rights, so just stored water in Highlight Reservoir.
But those are one and the same to me, like there's not blue water, storage water, red water, it's surface water. They all fit in the canyon and then they come out of the dam and they go down the creek and become surface water. And so I'm thinking out loud about who are the surface or the storage water right holders primarily?
It's like 50% ag, 50% city, and then the rest of the reservoir is Murphy rights or, state owned.
So there are so the direct flow rates or the surface water rates in the actual stream are different, and to try to keep those full, there are some management, like the management considerations involve being able to really adequately and accurately measure inflows to the reservoir. And then when deliveries for different purposes stop, or distribution of those different purposes from the reservoir of those storage rights stop, you have to make sure that inflows equal, or that outflows equal inflows. Like that's how I've seen that management work in a lot of other state projects. I imagine it's not too different here, but it's all commingled, like physically, not legally, but commingled in that reservoir. But there are ways to tease out the water amounts that are associated with stored water rights, those shares, and direct flow rates in the stream.
Okay.
Yeah.
I think it's super useful to think about it in your color scheme of like, there's red water, there's blue water, there's green water, those are all, but they're mixed together. But somebody made a claim before a reservoir was even contemplated to red water, and that is still a legal water right. Somebody, an entity, made an improvement to store water that created this new water type called blue water. And those storage rights are separate, and then there's market rights or whatever, green. They're all commingling in a physical availability sense, but in a legal availability, those different color blocks still exist in all of that.
And then they're managing the dam output to try to make sure that they're fulfilling all those requirements.
Yeah.
So
So they're releasing X amount to try to address all those needs. But
you said 50% is storage?
Yeah,
Or
so sorry, I think about it as 5,000 acre feet
Yeah.
for ag, about 5,000 for the city. And there's a little,
Just to add on some terminology as you go, 5,000 acre feet for ag, AKA surface water.
the short.
The share equals an acre foot.
Right.
And so all the acre feet behind that dam are shares. And so like, I think you're just saying that about half of the shares
Okay.
owned by the city and half are owned by producers, that use the water in the valley.
Yeah,
It's all blue water, not red water.
Yeah.
and then there's some that's a permanent pool that's nobody owns, state owns.
Right.
In both this option, I will just say fully support and think it's a great path forward to continue purchasing shares of highway as they become available. And then also, you know, we're talking in other contexts of raises to utilizing existing infrastructure to increase capacity. Both this and number 9 are things that would get strong support for me. Has a part of this conversation at all been around purchasing the structure itself? A transfer of ownership from state water projects and DNRC to the city of Bozeman as a management?
There, again, I think the city, Ryan and Griffin can speak to that more than I can in detail, but yes. Great, short answer, yes.
What would be the primary advantage of that?
To operate the dam. So,
Well, to own it in particular, is it?
You wouldn't be dependent on the legislature for prioritizing revenue for both maintenance and upgrades. That would be one advantage. Right now, you're conditioned on the legislative process to be able to take care of that.
And is that operated by DNRC? Is that operated by?
State water project.
there is a project, I think Brian was planning on talking about it later in the presentation. There is a CIP project coming up that would look at design options to optimize the releases from Highlight Dam. Because right now it's just manually done.
The project would help allow for wintertime releases there, which we don't currently do. I think that's one of the big advantages of transferring ownership is it was, the projects like that, are much easier to implement, with city involved and there's a lot of stakeholder engagement, right now to try to make that kind of project happen.
Well, in terms of the, moving forward with the new plan, I kind of agree with Clayton. I mean, I think this one's a no-brainer to keep on the table. And I guess part of my thought process there is that, most likely as we continue to see growth, there may be some ag producers that sell their land, so that there will be more opportunities. I'm hoping to buy more shares down the road just because of the growth patterns, but.
Does the city have a relationship or in conversation at all with the Gallatin Water Trust?
I think, Griffin, do you know, I feel like there have been a couple of conversations, but nothing has really materialized from that.
Yeah, that's been my understanding, but yeah, those conversations could be happening too, at just a higher level.
You mean that you're not aware of? Oh, okay, yeah. Since there, and every one of these, what are we calling these options, has a piece that applies to, acquiring, trading, leasing, selling, rights where they're trying to build this space to help facilitate those communications and appraisals ultimately of what the value is and what the availability is as land use changes.
What is the water trust?
The Gallatin Water Trust is an organization that is hoping to offer a kind of like a brokerage of water rights. So as land use changes and ag users no longer need that ag water, they can facilitate the purchase or the purchase of water for other uses and facilitate some of the administrative work that is required for the change of use or place of use and mitigation and all of those things that I am not sure if I speak on. And as well as leasing water rights, for example. If an operation, a farm operation shrinks in scale and they no longer need their entire allocation, they could lease that out for some other use for their, economic benefit.
So is the trust a consulting group or does
It's
the agricultural operation actually give or provide or however transfer the water rights to the trust? How does the trust really operate?
They are still in a growth position. They're still defining how they would be the holder of those rights. They kind of are, want to think of something in escrow maybe, or just a temporary
Sure.
holding space
Yeah.
for a water right as it, and they can kind of, hold on to some rights that don't necessarily have a use yet, that might go to mitigation, or that might go to other uses. But they're kind of like the middle person that helps facilitate, like hold the use until it's got, a destination and help facilitate the administrative piece.
But what I would use to describe it as a water bank.
Yeah, thank you.
I was gonna say eBay, but.
You know, you might go to the bank to get a short-term loan, or you might put something in the checking account, savings, like those sorts of things. I've tried to move it, it's been very involved in helping stand up the Gallatin Water Trust as, I think, a pilot for the water bank concept that other states have utilized, particularly looking at places like Colorado, who have robust water banks that help facilitate this sort of exchange of water for mitigation purposes and all those sorts of reasons. Montana water law certainly allows for banks, water banks, and the concept of this mitigation bank. It's just, it takes a significant amount of capital to get it set up and put together so that then you can absorb primarily the transaction costs. So that an individual water rate owner wouldn't have to go through the transaction costs of temporarily changing, or going to a short-term water lease or all those sorts of things. The bank could absorb some of those transaction costs to facilitate more,
Less friction.
less friction between a water purchaser, somebody in need of water, and then somebody who has a product for sale.
How does the bank make their money?
They don't.
It's a nonprofit.
It's a nonprofit. How do the people pay? But, it's still a nonprofit. Okay.
Yeah, so they've been looking for, and the Four Corners Foundation and some other entities, sort of foundational support. You know, I think that in other states, there's some level of state investment and support to help facilitate these banks to pay for that overhead cost.
Idaho is a good example.
Idaho was a great example. So, I mean, in other states, it looks different, and there are people who step in, whether it's government entities or foundations or water users or whoever, to help pay for the overhead. But the idea here is you're not JP Morgan, and you're not trying to maximize shareholder profit. You're just trying to be able to absorb that transaction cost of facilitating.
How large is this specific trust that we're talking about? It's referring to as the Gallatin?
The Gallatin Water Trust, it's relatively, I mean, they're trying to stand it up and prove a proof of concept. And I mean, I think if I looked toward the future of Montana water law, the Gallatin, I think, is a prime example of where you have more willing buyers and sellers and a need for this sort of transaction at a higher level than, say, Ecolanda, where you probably have very little supply or demand for that sort of facilitation. But the Flathead, the Missoula Valley, Helena Valley, I mean, all of these high growth areas, I think, have a demand. And you could imagine 50 years from now, these water banks being quite profuse or large. But this is, Gallatin Water Trust is the first one trying to set up and put together some sort of proof of concept that this can work.
To give you a sense of how kind of embryonic this is, they have their homepage, GallatinWaterTrust.org, is a single page that says, we're under construction. Join our mailing list.
Yeah.
They're very new.
Okay. Question, so we're talking about Highlight Reservoir being 10,184 acre feet. Is that at full capacity?
It's at the spillway, yeah.
It's at the spillway, okay. The distribution of that during drought conditions is allocated based on senior water rights.
Based on, I'm getting outside of my expertise as well, but it's based on calls to the dam operator And there is no, to my knowledge, there is no priority with the storage rights. They all have the same priority.
So all the shareholders get cut back the same amount if they had to do something drastic.
Yeah, but the reservoir is small enough that it fills. It's never not filled.
It's, I understand that those storage rights there are junior and are only, but that during the runoff period, fill dam, and then throughout the year, then they release from there, but it's those calls would negate the release of that water, so that happened during high flow.
So they're junior to in-stream rights. But in terms of priority for owners of shares, they're all the same priority.
Storage. Because it's an overall storage, right? And then,
They don't have the same priority date.
exactly, yeah.
Then it's probably stipulated in the the contracts, and your share ownership is how that is. That contract is the place where that would be negotiated of what would happen in a drought scenario is that shared sacrifice so that everybody takes this cut. Whatever.
So the seniority actually goes back to prior to when the dam was built.
Red water always goes through.
Yeah,
The
that's,
blue water
The
is.
flow through, yeah.
The direct flow water has a much more senior
yeah,
priority date. But the shares
Blue
were
water.
created with the construction of the dam.
yes.
And that's the priority date of those shares of the stored water.
Um,
The risk of the impact of a drought here for highly stored water would be during April or May when runoff's happening, and the reservoir wasn't able to be filled all the way. The late season and stream flow rights during a drought year would potentially get called, but that wouldn't affect the stored water. If that was flowing down highway at that point, that makes sense.
Can you go back one slide?
Yeah.
Please. So the number that you use in there, the supply, 3,626, is the same number that was being used in the 2013 hour.
Yeah, we haven't redone the analysis.
Okay, so
Yeah.
again, the recommendation was to go ahead and be purchasing water rights. So I'm trying to understand, I mean, it's good to understand where we were in 2013, but I kind of want to know, a lot of recommendations were made to do this, do that. Is somewhere along the line where we're going to get updated information, or I thought it was going to kind of happen as we were going along. So do anybody know where we are now with how much we purchased and how much is still on the table?
I don't know exactly, but I think it's still close to 3,000 acres.
Okay,
Hundreds of acre feet have been purchased, my knowledge.
So, well, my understanding is it's a little shy, that's 160, 170 acre feet that have been purchased since 2013 by the city.
Additional shares.
Yeah, additional shares.
okay.
You bring up a good point, and maybe we don't need to discuss it now, but I think the goal of talking about alternatives now for last meeting, this meeting, and next meeting is to kind of put everything out on the table and not necessarily start quantifying things. And then for the TAC and the city to kind of boil that down to something that we think are worth pursuing further, and then going back, doing the analysis, and then coming forward with numbers for you to do a more thorough evaluation. Does that make sense?
In other words, the thought is that, like you did, said, put everything on the table, and then see which of those are, just non-starters. If there are any, there might not be. This group might say, oh gosh, let's, in 2013, let's have a look again, let's sharpen our pencil on how much acre feet we got left on that. At some point, this group's gonna take a short, break, multi-week break. And that's the time when AE2S is gonna come back and sharpen their pencils. And they'll come back to us and say, here's this option, this alternative that we've come up with. Here are the specific, the TAC asked for it to continue into the process, so we did our due diligence on it. Here's what it looks like today. Do you guys think that that is something that should be a high priority to pursue in the current IWAP update? Or is it not worth it enough and we should, discount it, in favor of other options that have been studied? So this is just giving you, the idea is just to give this group a deep understanding of what has been studied, what the rationale for it appearing in the 2013 IWAP. And then at some point, like I said, we'll take a break and come back, and that's when the rubber hits the road with this group saying, yes on that alternative, no on this alternative.
Okay, so we won't be making our recommendations on yea or nay on these alternatives as they have already been presented in 2013 hour until after we have seen what success rate has already been achieved with some of these that were actually implemented.
Said the other way, after AES does their work and homework, they're gonna come back with very sharp pencils on this stuff and say, now, do you guys recommend this or not? So we're not gonna ask you to recommend or not recommend things based on 2012, 2013 data. This is just more of an information session to get everybody steeped in the vast range of alternatives that were considered.
Okay.
With that said, if we want to kill any of that, like help us.
Yeah, well,
That's what I was gonna say. I mean, I'm kind of viewing this as our role in the moment. It's like, yeah, I mean, first look at these, it's like continue with them or just throw them out.
sure.
And then if we continue with them, this is probably a good time to give you guys some questions or some thoughts so that when they do go back and sharpen their pencils, there's some feedback, you know, so.
Which is exactly what this group has been doing in the conversations that we're having around these alternatives and saying, you know, gosh, this one sure seems like it would get a lot of support from me. That statement was made earlier. You've been saying this one makes sense to move forward. That's exactly the kind of feedback that we're looking for at this point in the process. So that's why I also was asking, you know, hey, if anybody got a role or two to poke into this?
Yeah. It's just the way my brain works is that this is already 12 years old.
Yeah.
And a bunch of work has already been done. And then like you presented with, you know, the success rate of conservation. I mean, so you are, when that was put on the table, you then turned around and said, this is how successful we've been. So I guess in my brain, I'm thinking, okay, so as you present this is the supply, well, where are we now? That's kind of how I need to kind of see, is this, you know, we've had 13 years of action. Where are we at with it now? Is this still, how, where is it on the priority list? So. But I understand, so.
Still high on the city's priority list.
Yes, and this one obviously makes sense.
But we are gonna ask you to kind of give an assessment like this with the imperfect information.
Sure. With regard to, this whole aspect of like water coming in and measuring, so in the watershed monitoring, there was talk about needing to get much more accurate information, and there was talk of doing installation of monitoring equipment to improve those numbers. Where are we at with that? Did that get done and does it still need to be looked at?
I didn't catch all that for this alternative.
No, well, yeah, it does apply to this alternative as well.
Just stream monitoring in general.
Yeah,
Yeah, we installed an additional gauge on Sourdough since 2013. And then I can't speak to Lyman if there's any additional infrastructure up there. And I'm looking at Griffin, so maybe he knows.
I believe there's.
I think there is too, but
Optimization project.
yeah,
We'll talk about here.
yeah, okay.
I can.
Wasn't there a change in funding? I know at some point, not too long ago, the USGS was gonna pull their funding for the highlight gauge.
Yeah,
And then the city jumped in to cover those costs.
correct.
And is that a gauge that's down by the intake, or is there just the one gauge, or is there a gauge at the dam and a gauge by the intake, or?
There's one on East and West Fork above the dam, and I think there's just the one below the dam. which is the one that was going to lose funding.
But that was kind of an odd, this really, they made that choice because they knew someone.
If we pull ours, they'll come up with the best thing.
Yeah, because I mean, that could be a more important gauge on the ballot than that one.
Yeah,
If you're gonna mothball one, that would not be the one to pick for normal reasons.
Yes,
But that'd be good information on the update, you know, get that to us.
Jess, but you also think that some of the more technical tools that you guys are using, web-based, GIS-based, a lot better sensors, a lot better weather gauges and that sort of thing, all of that's kind of coming into some of your models and tools that you're using. Would you say that that contributes to the city's knowledge base in a way that could be kind of a proxy for some stream flow monitoring devices or no?
I think so. I mean, we have a drought monitoring tool that looks collectively at multiple gauges, snowpack, stream flow, of course, reservoir levels, to give us a sense of our conditions at any point in time. And if we're, you know, average, below average, above average. And then we're also, so that, I think, yes, does that. We're also working with MSU and having our capital plan next year to install additional instrumentation in the site as well, to measure snowpack and a bunch of other data points to, right, we need a historical record, right, before we really start leaning on that, but to kind of paint a better picture in Sourdough.
The tools that were involved weren't available in 13 and now
Yes.
can be brought to bear.
Correct, yep. We can break for lunch.
Okay, Becca, did you have a question?
Thank you. I was just going back to the raising of the dam, and I was wondering if there were any updates on potentially imagery of the reservoir, because I think that for me, understanding of the actual capacity is key too. I think we're working on a big set of assumptions. We haven't filled in a lot of the dam over the 75 years since it's been built.
Yeah, I think we found or said that it hadn't been surveyed bathymetrically since the 90s. Since previous dam raise. Is my understanding, is that correct, Brian?
I believe so, yes.
Thank you.
Just looking at the dam raise piece, I mean, that was the impetus for me thinking about the ownership transfer piece as well. Just, I'm trying to deal with a dam raise on a state water project over on the Ruby, and is it, with all love and respect for my friends at DNRC, it is a very frustrating process. Which is not necessarily DNRC's fault, it's staffing challenges at DNRC and hiring engineers. It's also the legislature and how that process of appropriation works. I hope that we help stem some of the challenges financially for state water projects, but to rely on that process for a dam raise is a frustrating endeavor. And the transfer of ownership where you would have control over being able to make those financial calculations and technical calculations internally as an entity seem to be preferential. So to me, part of that option for a dam raise, while not reliant completely on securing ownership of the facility, I think that would make it a more realistic option. We're almost 20 years into this Ruby Dam conversation with the NRC, and it's a long process. That's why the ownership piece came up to my mind as well in that.
I guess, yeah, in terms of what we just discussed, the whole process, I mean, this is really, not only should stay on the table, based on the public comment you've already got, I think that even highlights, it's still kind of a potential high priority, but seems like a no-brainer.
The fact that this is on Forest Service land too makes things harder.
so could you say that again?
The fact that it's Forest Service land too, there are a lot of additional considerations and requirements there that like are not a hindrance in other state projects or in other places where
I mean, that goes both ways too, right? One of the primary hindrances was a certain late night TV show host who happened to own property right at the top of Ruby Dam, who had a relationship with the prior governor who shut that running down. Like, the Forest Service also means that you're not dealing with individuals, that have influence and ability to stop and go projects. And then also looking at Ruby, it's like, I would like to get that done before some new subdivision goes on the shore of Ruby Reservoir, because then you're gonna have to negotiate potential dam raise with 14 new rich people who own this property and just invested a bunch of stuff. So I understand there's like complex permitting with a federal partner on that, but it also is one partner and others they have to negotiate with.
I don't know if this was asked while I was out, but, pursue this, would it be better for the city to have ownership of the dam versus the state ownership?
That was Clay's.
Short answer, yes.
Yeah.
Okay.
My suggestion would be yes, but I think both. On paper, both are possible.
My question, if I was the city, would be kind of the legal aspects of liability and stuff, would be the main thing I would be looking at.
Yes, you wanna stop for lunch now or? Okay.
Eric, can you introduce food, go over allergies and stuff?
So we have bowls from Five on Black today. I was fortunate to learn that everything on their menu is preemptively gluten-free, so there's no concerns there. The only potential dairy-free issue was their garlic sauce, which they just nixed from all the bowls today, so everything is gluten and dairy-free, so help yourselves, there are no constraints in that regard. What?
The whole thing, which are.
Yes.
Sorry.
There are little cheese ball puffs to go with everything.
All done. You remember your first.
I did, try to take my question when I can. I mean, a 3-hour meeting, it's kind of a little inhumane to not present people with sugar. They're all kind of different items are checked. They're half chicken and half beef for the protein. I asked them to kind of do a mixture of all their different options, so it's kind of a choose your own adventure day. Anything else for everybody?
You over.
I'm not even sure.
Like, you're still, it's just friends.
Projects. Let's see. Get out. Yeah. That's good. That's a shelter drop in next year.
Started again, just to make sure we can get through everything. I said, we have all this time and we've had such good discussion that now I'm like, oh, maybe we should keep it, so. We'll jump back in.
Yeah, sorry.
Only a few more alternatives to run through and then we'll shift gears, to something else. The final water supply development project. Was Brackett Creek import. I don't know if Nate or Brian wants to talk more detail to this. I wasn't involved. I think the thought here was that it's in a different basin. It's in the Shields Valley drainage, so that basin isn't closed. And I think that was kind of the thought here of why to consider Brackett Creek import.
Yeah, that's correct. That's my recollection. Of why that was selected. Back in the day.
I don't think it moved. Yes.
We should probably stop and acknowledge and introduce Brian.
Oh, yeah.
Who's he? Yeah, who's this guy? This is, welcome, Brian. Yeah, thank you, Matt. Brian Easton, I'm the city senior water resource engineer with the utilities department. Glad to be here. I have a lot of information, knowledge on historical planning practices here with our water supply feature and the 2013 outlook. And happy to be here to provide some information here to this group today.
One moment, we're sharing the wrong screen. Oh, that's okay.
And that Brackett Creek import, I don't think moved very far in the high in the priorities, from the last IWRP. Questions or comments or discussion items on this specific alternative?
I guess I would say my general thought when I look at this one is that it's definitely not one of my favorites. It just seems complicated. But I think the big thing, and it's in the original report, is it's kind of hard to evaluate because we don't even really know how much water we're talking about. So just not a lot to go on in terms of evaluating it.
Yeah.
It might be worth doing a little bit of that footwork, but that's about as far as I can take this one for now. It's just kind of, thinking about it. And there's a lot of, just seems like you got a lot of water right and complicated environmental issues by transferring water between drainages.
A lot of other
If it's
water.
not a lot of water, it's not worth the effort.
Yeah, and water on the shields is a big issue too. Right, so that, being a main trip of the shields would be problematic from that perspective as well.
I mean, I was to say, from my perspective, outside of the specifics of this creek and this transfer or import, the concept is not a bad concept to keep around in the sort of review, but there might be better opportunities than spending a lot of time looking at this one specific.
Yeah, and I think there was a more general alternative considered that was just general import from other sources. So fleshing that out a little more in the next iteration of this plan may be worth it.
And why bracket of the other creeks up in the bridges? Just,
Because it's the biggest and closest to the divide, to dump back into the bridge creek.
okay.
Okay, moving on then to OS, which is just other supply derivatives. Sorry. Non-potable groundwater supply, so this would be leveraging exempt wells or other groundwater wells specifically for irrigation, specifically for new development, was the thought with this this alternative. I think this is still a high priority for the city, as they move forward and have made strides to do this. We talked a little bit, previously, can't remember which meeting, but about, Sunset Hill Cemetery, use of ag rights there for non-hogwood irrigation and, sports park as well.
That was kind of my consensus too, is that, yeah, I mean, this one seems pretty straightforward, it's very doable. I'm not sure, you know, in terms of water numbers, how big of an impact it's gonna have, but, you know, people always talk about death by 1,000 cuts, so I guess you could say, you know, healing by 1,000 bandage too, so. I mean, any little bit helps in the long run, and some of these could be substantial enough to be good projects, so. Certainly no reason to take it off the table. And like we talked about earlier, then it sounds like maybe we'll get some numbers on what was actually done. So, see, or any predictions on how much you think you might be able to get?
Well, it's really all tied to, state policy with exempt wells. And, wherever the state decides to take that issue or potential court, you know, future decisions on that. You know, full disclosure, we've been taking full advantage of that with new subdivision development, to irrigate parkland and subdivision open space. It is available legal means of supply, right, to meet that demand, so, you know, we're using it.
Is development of that sort of resource something that could be pulled in under like, developer impact fees?
No, I don't think so. Okay. Yeah, those are two different things. Yeah.
But in a way, that's the developer for every new annexation project is paying for that well installed.
They are, right, but that's not an impact fee per se, that's just capitalization, it's required to meet our requirements, so.
So you're basically in some of these newer developments, just having them put in the exempt well so they can irrigate with them,
Yes.
requiring less city water. Seems to make sense to me.
My only feedback was just, and I think Brian captured it well in terms of the uncertainty of state policy on this subject, and so lightning rod issue and state debates at the moment, both in legislative interim committees, potential legal challenges. There's all sorts of pathways that are on the table for where that might go, and I would hate to like bet the farm on something that changes 5 years down the road.
Yeah.
That, I think the gal, it's like a bright spot on the radar for that too, so.
Yeah. And I would say that in the conversations that I've been in, and this is my own philosophy too, is sort of in addition to the Gallatin being a bright spot of a target to look at, specifically using that water for lawn and garden irrigation is also up there on a high target list as well. Like there's some defensibility and things for in-home domestic uses and growing appetite to look at lawn and garden a little bit differently for an example. That's a lot of uncertainty.
On the other, yeah, and related to that, and I don't remember the name of the house builder, they just talk about it, but there is a new bill that was passed, it's gonna change that process. It already has changed it a little bit, yeah, 681. So now it's gonna change to basically a process where the developer would have to file a notice of intent for that well. They're gonna look at that, look at combined appropriations, and along with the designate the source aquifers, they can look at total combined appropriations, so. There's already some changes in they're coming, and I guess in the next session there'll be more.
Are the changes more towards, utilizing that water for irrigation purposes or are they trying to go ahead and
More towards trying to really clamp down on the use of exempt wells, general, I think, especially in development situations where, you know, in the past, the developer might have proposed multiple exempt wells to supply water for the whole subdivision. My understanding would be like if you had a, and I, you know, check with DNRC, you may know more, but
I would say Brian and Clayton were pretty instrumental in our stakeholder working group
yeah,
that,
yeah.
that presented or put those bills together.
So if you have a developer that had a project, it sounds like that would fall under the category of, for combined appropriation, a single development. So if he was proposing 2 exempt wells in a subdivision, then my understanding is he could only get 10 acre feet. That's correct. For both wells. So, yeah. So that changes the dynamics. But,
Just nuance around community systems and stuff, but
yeah, yeah.
I will say the notice of intent, though, that new process, I think, is something that adds more certainty that did not exist before. So
Right.
that wouldn't be a roadblock that wouldn't be a roadblock. It does add certainty.
yeah, I mean,
Yeah.
I talk about 681 is it substantively did not change the law, it just changed the timing of the process. Because that review of combined appropriation was always gonna happen, now it happens before you drill the well instead of after you drill the well. So, increasing certainty.
So Brian, when a developer comes in and is able to go ahead and utilize a well, is that water only for irrigation of kind of like a interior parkland, or can it then be used as a distribution to watering lawns?
Only for, parkland, irrigation and subdivision open space.
Okay.
Is how we've seen those systems develop. We haven't seen a developer show up and say we want to develop a private irrigation system from an exempt well to serve our feedlots that we're creating through the subdivision process. 10 acre feet just doesn't go that.
Yeah.
That's 4 acres of bluegrass turf that it can supply on a seasonal basis. Which isn't a huge landscape area for that purpose.
And you, with these developments, you have kind of clamped down on how much park space, open space there is. It can be.
So the parks policy has changed. It's become more adaptive and flexible. In the past, before the changes, it was more manicured parks, right? Swing sets, bluegrass lawns, irrigation systems. We're beginning to shift into a more resource-oriented park landscape. Right? We don't have to have everything just being, Kentucky bluegrass. We can have more naturalized features, riparian areas that are all counted toward, park space that's required through our planning process.
Since we're on this kind of topic, I know this isn't groundwater, but if you can tell me if this is better to be answered later. So if a developer is acquiring property that a ditch had gone through it, what is the process there with regards to being able to just terminate the ditch, or is there a way in which that can be used as part of green space? Parkland?
Yeah. So
how does the city handle that?
Right. Well, first and foremost, we need to identify the ditches that are there, right, and who has water rights that are conveyed in them. A ditch is a property interest, right, third-party property interest on somebody else's land. So, it's covered by an easement. That easement needs to be respected. You can't just plow the ditch in, because that violates the easement itself, right? So there's a property interest issue there. Typically, the subdivisions are designed around those conveyance features, right? And there's advantages in maintaining that ditch system, because if that tract of land that's being developed has water rights for irrigation purpose that's already on it, right? That ditch conveys that water to that place of use. That's already described in that water right that we could then use, right, to support subdivision open space and parkland irrigation in lieu of developing exempt wells.
Have you had any developers who simply just tried to go ahead and fill in the ditch?
I've just tried to fill in the ditch?
Yeah. Who basically just said they recognize that they don't want to honor the ditch.
I don't know if there's any instances of developers just going and plowing stuff in.
if that did occur, right, and the easement holder caught word of that and was not able to receive their water right through that ditch, then they can bring that issue to court, and in all likelihood prevail, and get that ditch reestablished.
It seemed like I had heard some sort of a story with regards to somebody attempting that.
Yeah, there's plenty of stuff. I mean, so lots of ditches here and the Gallatin, lots of development going on. That's right for conflict. There have been conflicts that have occurred in the past, right, with respect to the nature of an easement, who actually has ownership interest in it, and how a development can or cannot modify or impact, right, that conveyance facility. We have become more strident about developers reaching out early in the development process to identify who has water rights in ditches, to initiate that conversation with them at the very beginning of their development process, to identify issues that may impact that ditch such that they can be mitigated and worked out on the front end of the project, right, with the canal or ditch company or water rights holder, so as to avoid, conflicts down the road.
Just to add to that, our code does allow for a developer to go through a process to demonstrate that the ditch is no longer in use and can be filled. It, for the most part, doesn't happen because of how much work it takes to prove that up, but that is still something that's allowed under our code.
Okay.
Which is noted in the Montana code that it's a 10-year, at least 10-year ban, but at the end with a capital A is a big legal process, so. The Bozeman city code needs to match that and just that.
I'm gonna, just housekeeping matter, we've been having a really good conversation on it. We are halfway through our slides and 2/3 through our time. You want to keep the conversation going? I want to keep it snappy, and I want plenty of time for, the 15 slides that Brian has pretty presented, so.
Yeah, I'll move on. OS2 Lime Creek optimization. This is just optimizing existing infrastructure up there to maximize the use of the city's water right from Lime Spring. Here's that spring box Tim I was talking about.
Oh, yeah.
It's a spring box in Lime. So they did some instrumentation controls to automate the draws from that, as well as some infrastructure changes. And I think, Ryan, you're managing a project right now looking at additional improvements to climate infrastructure.
Yes, but not the supply infrastructure, to the tank and the transmission main bulk tank. So this lineman optimization project has been completed already. We did not realize 2,500 acre feet as a result of the improvements that were made. And the extent of the improvements on the supply side of the system have been realized. So I don't foresee any additional Lyman Creek development occurring on the supply side of that system.
So, would that be one to just take off the table?
So that's maxed out.
What's that?
That is maxed out.
That one's not.
Okay.
So when you say it's maxed out, I remember picking up there that part of the issue was that you couldn't capture all the water because there was nowhere to put it, I think.
And we have
There was some overflow that wasn't captured.
Yeah, that's just the nature of the configuration of that junction box.
Right.
That was shown on the screen there. There's a V-notch overflow weir, right? And then the transmission pipeline down to Lyman tank. We can't have the water level in that box dip below the soffit at the top of that pipe. Otherwise it starts sucking air and it causes operational problems to downstream POVs. You can't process improvements at the treatment plant there. So yeah, that was the limitation that the instrumentation and controls project helped optimize.
Is that water supply quite steady throughout the year?
No, it's very variable throughout the year.
Okay.
Yeah.
So the numbers we're talking about are to be received during spring, so?
So we use that water supply every single day of the year. And we maximize its utility, right, up to the full measure of our water rate. So when the source, when the spring is producing the full measure of our water rate, we take it, right, and we send it to town. When the source is only producing half, right, of our water rate, we still take every bit that we can and send it to town. In the winter time during the base flow period, the spring produces about 1 million gallons a day. We divert it, we send it to town. It's our oldest water supplier, it's the most valuable water supplier, cheapest water supply to operate. So we fully maximize the utility of that system.
And then the final one was, I just grouped them all together, but, water conservation, obviously, we've learned a lot about that in the past several meetings and how successful that's been and kind of what that has looked like since 2013. So yeah, that's all of the alternatives presented in the 2013 IWRP. I think we're gonna move into, additional or maybe slight variations of alternatives that were looked at for with the city and Jeff's on some conservation measures.
The reasons not looking forward to the ideas and some zones, it's not maybe that last 5 years. Yeah, I was just making something, but just as a kind of a reminder. We added that. Oh, yeah, great.
Does everybody know Grayson?
Yeah, it's been, do a quick introduction again, guys. It's the first time I've been up and presented for this group. So Griffin Nielsen, one of the city's water resource engineers. I've been hovering in the background, but finally had a chance to get up here and present for you guys. I'll kind of present some kind of alternatives that have been on the city's mind. But before that, we'll kind of quickly touch on some of these supply projects that have been underway, and also let Jess and Brian jump into to add in. So the first is the highlighted reservoir share acquisition. We covered a little bit of this earlier, but we have made some progress on that front. Gathering shares, I believe we've acquired 167 shares since the 2013 IWRP update. That has slowed a little bit with some work with the DNRC, but that's still of interest to us. We've been working on our municipal groundwater project, and I should probably let Brian jump in here since he is our lead on that one.
Yeah, that one's been underway for some time now. It was an initial priority coming out of the 2013 IWRP. So we did hire a consultant to prepare a model and identify a well site for potential development. That was drilled at the Bozeman Sports Park. We didn't get the yield out of that well that we were anticipating coming out of the desktop exercise through the modeling. So we have not pursued the next step in filing a groundwater permit application, complementary mitigation application. So we're taking a step back, right, to revisit the modeling element of this with a new consultant and a new modeling team to develop a more sophisticated modeling environment here. And we're well underway with the consultant on this kind of reinvigorated effort for the groundwater supply. What we're looking at right now for a primary target for a project, an initial project for groundwater development is aquifer storage and recovery. This is a relatively novel concept in Montana. Now the statutory authority is in place to allow for this kind of infrastructure development to occur. But there hasn't been a project in Montana yet to test statutes in the process. So this may be the very first one. But we think that there is an opportunity here, given the state's focus and new priority on storage, right? Which has been funded here through the cycle, largely through the work of Clayton and his advocacy on that. So thank you, Clayton, for carrying that one. Very, very important. So there's an opportunity here, right, with a focus on storage, with some funding that we could potentially tap to partner with the DNRC to do a pilot project to show that this concept can work in this kind of aquifer setting that we have here in Gallatin, right? This is a unconfined, semi-confined, largely unconfined aquifer system here. So there are questions with respect to how this would work, right? When you look at kind of classic ASR projects that have been implemented in places like California and Arizona, their aquifer systems there, particularly in Arizona, are very different from what we have here in these alluvial aquifer basins. They're karstic, they're deep, they're cavernous, they're big caves underground, right? So they have an easy means, right, to inject water and then take water out of a discrete confined space. It's a little different setting here in alluvial aquifer where water is consistently moving through the aquifer system to leave the valley. So there's some technical elements there and some policy elements that we need to sort through with the DNRC, but we're committed to seeing if we can figure this one out. And when I get to the water rights kind of overview component of the conversation, we do have a couple storage rights that we currently do not have infrastructure to be able to utilize. We'd like to use those existing municipal storage water rights for this purpose, for this aquifer storage and recovery project. I can get into more detail when we get into the water rights component of the conversation.
Could I add one thing to that? I talked to Jessica a little bit about this, but the Bureau of Mines, the groundwater investigations program, also has some funding. And they looked at the Flathead, and they're just now in the early stages of looking at the gallows. So they're gonna be doing some work. I think looking at the possibilities here too, which I don't think in any way would, should or would interfere with what you're doing with your consultant, but it might be good for them to communicate. It's just to see who's doing what. And one of the things related to that, which is, this is really in its infancy, but I did just recently discover that they did a number of seismic lines crisscrossing the Gallatin Valley in the past. Surprisingly, not that long ago, like early 80s. So we just sat down with the folks that own that data and the consultant kind of looking at least the preliminary seismic lines to try to figure out more about the geometry of the basin, what the bedrock structure looks like and how deep it's like. So there may be some information there that's of use ultimately for the modeling aspect too, but trying to find an area where you have good confining conditions seems to be the big challenge. But there's indications of some pretty deep basin fill south of Bozeman and also kind of to the east and maybe a little bit northeast of Belgrade. And the seismic data shows that it is there. Some low gravity data showed it too, but.
Well, we have more summarily partnered up with WET. And WET's largely doing the modeling effort here on this. So I can connect Pat Eller and Rutherford with WET to you. Would that be the best way to?
You started me, yeah, I knew that we would, pass on to the manager for the groundwater investigations program, and I've worked with that before. Yeah, I just think, there's no reason to have two people running around doing stuff, not having any idea doing one with the other, but you guys are probably looking, much more intently at specific sites. I think they're just kind of trying to evaluate overall in the basin where possibilities are. So yeah, could be some synergy there.
Yeah, I think there is. There's going to be some overlap there for sure. Yeah.
Cool.
Moving on, so our next category is kind of our optimization projects that we've been working on. So we haven't gotten underway with it yet. It's in our capital plan, and we'll get underway here shortly. But this is the highlight reservoir optimization, which we kind of touched on earlier. So this would be adding instrumentation controls at the highlight facility, so we could remote operate and dial in releases there, as well as armor the head tower to allow for wintertime releases. Right now, we don't, practice is not to do wintertime releases because of concerns over damage to the head tower there with the freezing of the lake. The next is kind of ongoing work within our distribution system. We've increased our funding to do rehab and repair work throughout our distribution system. It's kind of ongoing efforts, and then our water department has been increasing efforts on our leak detection system. We actually just rolled out a hydrant leak detection program, which is pretty interesting, where you do continuous monitoring throughout. For us, it's a pilot program, so it's just a portion of our distribution system, but to try to catch leaks in real time. And then as well as investing in kind of our PRVs to support kind of pressure management. Bozeman does have quite high pressure. So continuing the effort to maintain that higher pressure means higher rates of leakage and more wear and tear in our system.
I'm just so eager.
So kind of next slide here is to kind of talk through some alternatives, both ones that were covered with the past IWRP, as well as some concepts that city staff has thought about or is interested in having you guys, the TAC, maybe consider a little closely at. Again, several of these we've kind of touched on already, but I kind of held off bringing anything up knowing that the slide's coming, and to also just let the team have open dialogue before we got into it. First one on our list was sour storage. So slightly different flavor than the alternatives that Zach kind of covered earlier for beaver dam analogs or kind of wellhead dams. City staff is still interested in revisiting the idea of a large storage reservoir up in Sourdough. Again, this is kind of coming back to the theme that storage is probably from the operation and city's perspective is the easiest tool in our toolbox to manage our supplies.
So jump in there, Griff. We recognize it's a challenging project politically, right? But just speaking conceptually, we're looking at our water supply future and the fact that we're storage limited here in Gallatin, and the flexibility that storage provides a municipal utility with managing its water availability. We believe it's worth a conversation here with this group to see if there's support for a larger dam and reservoir in Sourdough Canyon. But again, the political element of that would be challenging. Working with the Forest Service under its current Custer Gallatin National Forest Plan and some land use restrictions that they put over Sourdough Canyon, add an additional layer of complexity to being able to successfully implement this project if it is something that the TAC would be supportive of. But again, because we're so storage limited here, we think it's worth a conversation.
Quick question on that. So obviously, Mystic Lake is out of the question. The geology doesn't support putting it right back. So what do you, in this conversation, what are you looking at with regards to kind of pushing forward something?
As far as the location is concerned?
Yeah, or how you would orient it, multiple.
Yeah, so
or something.
I think the configuration of the storage is subject to discussion, right? Whether it's a series of smaller reservoirs or one large one. We do know that Mystic is off the table, right? That ship has sailed and did long ago. It's just not a suitable environment geologically, for a dam and reservoir facility. A lot of work has gone into, evaluating storage, locations, right, for a larger 6,000 acre foot impoundment in Sourdough. There's two primary locations that have been identified as not having any red flags or fail flaws, pardon me, you know, in the siting of that particular location, given desktop work. So we got a pretty good idea of where these things can go. And we have water rights that the city owns that are available, that are for municipal purpose, for storage in Sourdough County. So it would be utilizing those rights to be the legal supplier right to this facility. I can get into more of that when we have the other session.
Any other questions on that one?
Thank you.
I'll just mention too that these alternatives are in no particular order. It's not like this is a prioritized list. Next up is non-potable irrigation. And so there's, the first topic on this subject would be possibility of implementing a policy that would require properties that are being developed, if existing irrigation rights are on the property, that those rights be used to supply irrigation demands for that property, and that'd be a policy that we, the city impose. You know, it's sometimes challenging for developers to go forward and actually utilize those rights. So a policy that requires that could be beneficial there.
Yeah, in more of the detail on that. So, lots of different water rights here in the Gallatin, right? Lots of different sources. Not all water is created equal with respect to priority date availability on the source. So you really have to take a close look, right, at the nature of the water right that's on any given development tract, to see if it is reliably available to meet the irrigation demand over the course of the irrigation period. If it's not, then you have to figure out what supplemental supply, be that a well perhaps, or the city's municipal system. On the municipal system, you gotta be really careful from a public health and safety perspective that you have cross connection protection in place, right? So you're not feeding irrigation supply back into the distribution system. But yes, there's a lot of opportunity there for this. Two primary canal companies that deliver water to and through Bozeman, Middle Creek Ditch Company, Farmers Canal. There's opportunity in working with those ditch companies to acquire those shares to be used for this purpose. Farmers Canal is such that it's a relatively junior water right on the West Gallatin, so they get called or curtailed in most years by the end of July. So then you have that, 2-month period, September and August, that's not covered by that water right, that would need a supplemental source. The Middle Creek Ditch Company's water rights are senior, they're the senior rights on Highlight Creek. So they are going to be reliably available every year to meet irrigation demands, if this is the direction that this TAC is supportive of, and ultimately putting policy around.
When you say build a policy around, are you saying that that would be a city policy? Or it would show up in city code that when a developer acquires a property that specifically conveys a water right for that property, that's how it's used?
Yes, and that policy is already codified in that any useful water right that's on a tract of land be transferred to city ownership, right, as part of that development process. Our codified policy with respect to irrigation supply, I think does provide a means of placing a condition of approval on subdivision development to utilize those pertinent water rights that are on that development tract. We haven't seen a development project subdivision actually implement right? The utilization of those water rights for this particular purpose. There's some other nuances with respect to ownership, right, of the rights and development of discrete systems when it comes to the city owning and operating parkland and maintaining those spaces versus private subdivision open space. And having discrete systems that are owned and maintained separately, for those two operators. And how we deal with the ownership of the water rights and the split there. So there's some policy elements that we haven't completely thought through because we haven't had the project show up yet for that policy to be.
Just that unique situation, your desk.
Not yet.
Because when the city, if the city were to acquire rights on, any of the ditches, for example, you become a part of that ditch
Mhm.
company, whether it's incorporated or not, and then you also become responsible for the financial, implication for maintenance and maintaining the ditch and
Yep.
becoming one of those.
Yep, and we do have, we are a member of the Farmers Canal Company. We do pay the annual assessments and help contribute to the operation and maintenance upkeep of their system. This would be kind of operation and maintenance, after diverting that water out of the canal and dealing with, how those irrigation systems are separately owned, maintained, and the water right that is serving the source of supply for those discrete systems gets an ownership split on that as well. Some kind of lease back agreement or something, right? We have to deal with the property interest when it comes to implementing these systems.
So I hate to be this guy again, but it's kind of my job to watch the clock and watch the content. For the sake of conversation, it's my understanding, these are conceptual things that the city's interested in investigating. I note there's quite a few of these that we've kind of already covered today and heard feedback from the TAC on yay, nay, difficult politically, but good idea. There's a lot of variation on that. Would the TAC be okay if just glancing at this list and seeing if there's any that specifically you feel like deserve additional conversation today? I know DPU hasn't been, or direct potable reuse hasn't really been talked about. But it seems to me a lot of these others have.
I think there's a couple on there, Matt,
Yeah.
that will probably be new.
Okay.
But I think we've covered the solar projects, highlight dam race, already, so we can quickly move through those. I do want to add though, before we move on from the non-pot one, the concept of a city non-potable irrigation utility, that the city owns and maintains. Concept there being too, that the city could partner with the existing irrigation companies, to get that off the ground, and provides irrigation, to parts of the community that fall in the historic service area of the irrigation companies.
I guess I would just add to the extent that time allows it. It is helpful for me anyway to learn a little bit on some of these, if there's stuff that the city's been doing since the last plan, just kind of knowing a little bit more about that in terms of the value down the road, but it's be super brief, but.
So basically two strategies there to wrap it up in a nutshell, right? Individual implementation, right, of these non-pot systems per project, subdivision to subdivision to subdivision versus, right, the city taking a longer ranging view, right, to develop its own separate irrigation utility, right, that we would charge rates for, that would be used to service irrigation demands for new development. To the extent that the existing irrigation conveyance system can convey water to those locations that need it. And for it to provide irrigation to parkland, subdivision open space and private feedlots. Right? Which is a little different flavor from the subdivision by subdivision approach. But one that we think, has some promise.
Actually, that is exactly something that's been spinning in my brain with regards to utilizing groundwater for irrigation purposes, is the complexity of not having a distribution system earmarked just for that. Whereas, and I'm so glad to hear you saying this, because as we're in that development zone going into where potentially more groundwater can be accessed or ditch water or whatever it might be, before we're thinking being there that you could lay side by side pipe for potable water and irrigation water so that you're already building in the system to start handling where too much of our summertime water is being used for irrigation, but having the system to do the distribution in a controlled manner and then having the utility control it. So, yeah, I love that.
And it's a way to keep, its companies viable, right? As that kind of moves into their historic service area, it's a change in business model, right? But they have the water rights, communities have the need for continued irrigation. How do we, link up and
To me, that's one of the most exciting things I've heard to solve a problem with the expansion, not addressing areas that we already have, but we're talking about all this expansion going into those areas and for the city to already be like, this could work. So I love it.
Normally for time constraints, we run through some of these other ones. The two more conceptual ones to bring up are direct potable reuse. So taking effluent from our wastewater facility, treating drinking water standards and reintroducing that to the distribution system. We recognize that there's a public perception hurdle to get over there that is quite large. But I still think it's a worthwhile concept to have at the table. Next one is we're calling the Gallatin Watershed Field Improvements idea. Essentially, the idea of cloud seeding within the upper watersheds. At the state level, there's been some investigation done on this with positive findings. The opportunity to look at that may be worthwhile, not only from increasing the supply, but also a resiliency standpoint.
the legislature hasn't banned it yet.
Interesting.
So as part of that watershed field, also forestry practices and conifer production and all of those sorts of partnerships with the forest service that you guys are engaged in.
We haven't given that a lot of thought. So the work in the watershed to reduce the fire hazard is to reduce fire impact, right, water quality, and our ability to treat that water sent to town. We haven't looked at it from a yield management perspective. We do recognize that there is science out there that indicates there is correlations, but we haven't.
Yeah, and that's one thing I've been talking with both BLM and Bureau of Mines that are trying to get some better science around that watershed yield to understand and quantify what you can actually invest in a successful project.
Yeah. And there's been some work by NSU on this as well, with graduate study projects. So.
Kind of intentionally labeled this way to keep it broad.
Mm-hmm.
So then
It does not say cloud seeding.
Well, if you mention cloud seeding and increasing precipitation to Big Sky and Yellowstone Club, I'm sure they'd be all for it.
Yeah.
Well, people wouldn't mind 500 inches a year, miserable weather.
No.
Oh, those were the days.
Yep.
So the next two are maybe not directly in line with kind of some of the alternatives that have been discussed in the past. They fall more along the lines of resiliency projects. But we thought it was worthwhile to still bring these up to the group. The first is kind of this concept of valley reservoir preservation along the lines of performing an updated bathymetric survey as well as planning for sediment loading within the reservoir, both for kind of annual buildup as well as in an emergency situation where we see a fire within the watershed and that starts to fill. Obviously, we have partners there with the Forest Service and the association where responding to that can be challenging. So maybe getting out ahead of those scenarios to have a plan in place to be able to react a little faster. And the last one is this concept of utility interconnect. So connecting the water distribution system to adjacent utilities. And this is specifically for emergency situations, to deal with the health and human safety issue where we are running out of supply, some things brought up not to augment existing supply or lease water from, adjacent utility, but more part of that emergency situation that might come up. We're a little ways away from Belgrade or Four Corners, but as the communities all grow, that might become more viable. And benefits the Valley community as a whole too.
But those would only be for emergency purposes, is what you're saying.
That's how we're presenting this concept right now. There's other ways that can be looked at, but for as staff kind of presenting it, that was our thought, was just as for emergency situations.
Quick question on one that we skipped over, and it might just be that the wording is different, and we haven't explored this in another one. What does valley storage mean in this context?
Yeah, I just went right by that one, sorry.
No, you're fine.
So concept of valley storage is utilizing the existing man-made features for some of the existing features within the valley to store water primarily for the purposes of mitigation. As we look at groundwater supply, if you've driven in town, see the gravel pits around. So, leveraging some of that quote unquote infrastructure that's already out there for those purposes.
Great. Thank you.
Would surface water infiltration be built into that, where you might put water into some pond where you know it's gonna leak out, but you're putting it in to recharge groundwater and that for mitigation?
Yes. The call options are on the table.
Yep.
I guess one last call for questions on that. I just already kind of constrained. We still want to get through the rest of the agenda. Yes.
Did my time.
Okay, so, similarly, I was going to-
Thank you. I owe you.
Similarly, I was going to present on, just quickly as a reminder for the group, what, conservation measures and alternatives we're already pursuing. As well as ones that we think might be good to evaluate. I think also, as I think about the context of supply alternatives, everything we've been discussing in conservation, any of these conservation. And so I just think that's maybe good to keep in mind as we consider what might be reasonable. I won't read through this whole list, but essentially our current conservation program really focuses on education, outreach, incentives for retrofitting, whether that be landscaping or indoor plumbing fixtures. Working on distribution system improvements and tracking leakage within that system. And then as well as in more recent years, some policies related to outdoor watering, and then for new development, types of landscaping and irrigation systems that are permitted to be installed, ensuring that those are efficient. So that's basically what this slide is conveying, right? So that's kind of the suite of what we've been working on. And then similarly, as I presented last month, our 2023 conservation plan has some additional program measures outlined for recommendation. We went through these at that time. If you'll recall, the big one is the one on the bottom of the list, which would make changes to our current water adequacy policy and require that the water demand of any development be offset in full through efficiency projects. That's kind of the biggest driver for the projected savings in the conservation plan, once that was slated to go into effect in the model in the plan. But all of these things are currently on our radar as things we could pursue. But again, they're all on the table for this group to consider as well. Which is a little bit different than than the last integrated plan, because we didn't have a conservation program. So you guys have more work than the last one.
Can I ask something really quick?
Yes.
Does the low income leak repair assistance and installation program include detection?
It could. We have sort of started building out what that could look like administratively, and it doesn't, but I appreciate you bringing that up. We could think about that. If nothing else, we could potentially have, something built into like our staffing time to like look at, different accounts that may have leaks by looking at our data and reaching out to them proactively. I think that would at least be an easy way of trying to do that. So. I know I cruised through that. I'm trying to make sure we have time. Any questions on that, Seth? You guys have the plan as well, so you can
Yes, thank you
find
for that.
all the details.
Yeah.
We, as a team, I think hardly think that this group's gonna say, stop the conservation stuff, so.
Pedal to the metal.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's cheap and it's effective, so yeah, it's kind of a win-win. These are, some other measures not included in that plan for recommendation that we think would be good to consider. I tried to bucket them, in terms of like price signaling, rate structures, development, and retrofitting. We could look at doing a water budget-based rate system so that we would have, that could require or could not require, irrigation sub-meters, which we currently don't have, right? So thinking about the costs associated with that, that would be an option that we think would be worth exploring. On the new development side of things, potentially requiring, the installation of high-efficiency plumbing fixtures. And implementing some cooling tower regulations that came up earlier in our conversation today, are prohibiting single pass cooling equipment in some scenarios where that's feasible. Again, we have to make sure that we could do this, from, state requirement perspective. On the retrofitting side of things, we could look at requiring that fixtures be retrofitted on resale. Some cities do this, or a name change on the water account. Issuing rebates for cooling tower sub-meters or conductivity controller sensors. When those towers are not maintained well, they really use a lot of water. So that could be kind of low-hanging fruit, with that. Also looking at requiring landscape permits for retrofit projects. So if I wanna, redo my landscaping, I have to get a permit and make sure that I'm in compliance with city standards. And then potentially requiring non-functional turf removal down the road as well. So all of these things are just things on our radar, that we think would be worth evaluating. Yes.
Is there much for cooling towers? And then maybe I'm thinking giant cooling towers, but are there?
There's more than you think, because I went through this. There's a lot of small units, and cooling towers are used for things beyond, air conditioning, right? So there's a lot of, water using processes and systems that rely on them. So we can move the needle even in Bozeman with, cooling tower projects.
Non-functional turf.
So
It's like, what would you like?
this is probably non-functional turf, what you're seeing, right? It's not being used for recreation. Any turf in a boulevard is usually considered non-functional. We recognize that all the benefits of turf when it's used, but when it's only used when it's mowed, there's an opportunity to save there. So a lot of cities with conservation programs have pursued that, and had there's a lot of enforcement that goes along, but success.
This is, because it's required, that's very different than a cash for grass thing, like this.
Correct.
Right. Okay.
Yeah. Mhm. Yes.
This one looks like it's a retention and infiltration block too.
All right. Touche. Okay, well, the.
So what you're saying is just have a little bit of swell.
Any questions on that?
On the retrofitting, I kind of have a lot of mixed feelings with regards to the retrofit on resale. I don't know, there's a certain part of how far do you go into someone's property and.
Sure. Yeah.
I'm not, there's no warm fuzzies on that for me at all.
Okay, that's good stuff. Yeah.
We're just saying, keep going. I mean, these ideas I think are great and we should continue to explore them. And I really want to commend the city for looking at all options being on the table.
All right, water rates.
It's not there long.
15 minutes.
Yeah, well, we've talked about a fair amount of this already, so where to start? Sorry, this slide's pretty busy with information. I wanted to keep it to one slide, not a series, so the way I've organized this is by watershed. So the panel on the right map shows the 3 primary watersheds. Right, Line Spring, Bozeman Creek, and Highlight Creek. In those watersheds, we have legal water rights to water sources for municipal purposes. So what I'm showing you on the left is just water rights that are owned with one caveat by the city of Bozeman that are available for municipal purpose. Okay, the one caveat is Highlight Reservoir. The city does not own the actual water right itself. That water right is owned by the state of Montana through the DNRC. The city does own a contract for water that is stored in that facility. And we'll get into that detail later. So starting at generally trying to organize this by sources on the left-hand table that the city has developed over time, right? So at the top of the list, Lyman Creek, that was our original water supply for the city of Bozeman. It's our oldest water right. We actually have two discrete water rights. One with an 1864 priority date, the other with an 1881 priority date. Those were both senior rights on the source. That 1864 priority is one of the 10 oldest water rights in the entire Gallatin Basin. That was our original system. It's extraordinarily valuable. It's our cheapest water to use because we don't have to treat it under Safe Drinking Water Act surface water treatment rules. We just chlorinate it and send it to town. Right, purely gravity system, great water quality, good quantity, and we maximize the utility of that system. Next is Bozeman Creek. That was the second system that was developed for our municipal water supply. We have 8 individual water rights on the Bozeman Creek source. Of those 8 water rights, they're split into 2 different priority dates. 6 of them have an 1866 priority date, and 2 of them have an 1877 priority date. Combined flow rate, 6.575 CFS or 4.25 million gallons a day. Sorry, I didn't mention that on Lyman Creek. You can see the numbers there. Both Lyman Creek and Bozeman Creek are available for use continuously. And we do use both of those systems continuously. The 1877 priority date of the Bozeman Creek rights is relatively junior on that source, which is kind of crazy, right? To think that that source was nearly fully appropriated by 1877, but it was. So in drier years, those water rights can get called.
Can I ask a quick question on that?
Yeah.
Do those rights include the storage rights, or is the storage rights down below with
The storage rights are down below.
Okay.
Yep. The next system that we developed was the highlight system. So to orient you with respect to time periods, the Lyman Creek system was first brought online in 1889. The Bozeman Creek system was first brought online in 1917. Okay. The highlight system was brought online in 1955. Okay. All because of our, long-range planning efforts, looking out to identify a reasonably foreseeable future water need, recognize the deficit there, and that in order for us to stay in front of community growth, that we had to develop additional supply sources. And so we took the strategy to diversify, right, the supply portfolio by looking at 3 different water sources and 3 different watersheds. On the highlight system, the city owns what we colloquially call the Lichtenberg water rights on Highlight Creek. There's 4 of them with varying priority dates of 1866 through 1873. Those 4 water rights were changed to municipal purpose from their historical agricultural use. They are only available periodically through 3 periods in the summertime that are indicated there in the table.
They all have those periods of use?
Yes.
The same ones? Okay.
Yes.
pretty short periods.
They are, yeah. 2 15-day periods and 1 10-day period. Back in the day when that change application was being, moved through the process, that's how the DNRC was looking at things with respect to historical practice on the haying operation and when that water actually got applied to fields. So They were looking at things very, very detailed back then.
You know how many acres that old irrigation right was for,
I,
or are listed
it
on
was
this?
it was a quarter section at least, yeah. The next water right, municipal purpose, owned by city of Bozeman. It's a provisional permit with a 1978 priority date. Right, so this is not a constitutionally protected right. This is a permitted water right that was authorized by the DNRC. 1978 priority date is junior, right? But this water right is used during the cold weather period, typically. September 15th through April 15th is its period of use, so 7 months outside of the warmer season. It's junior on the source, and there's a lot of water rights that are senior to it, that could potentially call them. Yes,
Is that just provisional because it hasn't gone through the whole decree process or something?
because we haven't hit final decree yet. It was permitted after 1973.
Now there is a process by which it will become, we passed that over.
So that one is vulnerable from a call perspective. If, downstream seniors are not getting their right, then they could call us, which is a vulnerability to our system, for sure.
How many, downstream?
Downstream seniors are there?
In that period of use, yeah,
There's a few.
that's their, yeah. That's just like the thing.
There's a lot of stock. There's a lot of stock water.
Yeah.
There's, Murphy rights, owned by FWP or
Yeah.
administered by FWP on the Gallatin.
Yeah.
That could be a call, right?
And on Missouri, yeah.
Next is the Highlight Reservoir. The two water rights that are listed there are not the city of Bozeman's. We just have one water contract. The two water rights that are listed are owned by the DNRC. Two different priority dates. The first for the original project, appropriation in 1938. The second for the planned dam raise and rehabilitation, with a 1984 priority date. Both are junior on the source, right? And when I say junior on the source, I mean they're only available during spring high flow. Generally. We use that highlight water, or it can be used on a continuous basis, that reservoir water. We typically currently only use it during the summer season, during the irrigation season. Due to infrastructure limitations at the dam itself, challenging, place to get to in the wintertime can be. We have to armor the tower, automate the releases, and that optimization project really is necessary to be able to support future continuous use. And when I say continuous, that means we're releasing our stored water right out of the reservoir every single day of the year in order to meet TAC standard. Back to the panel on the right, what I'm indicating in the blue boxes is the legal available volume of those water rights, right? So just running the math out on the period of use and the flow rates that are available to come up with the volume. The reliable number that is indicated in the boxes factors in priority on the source, right? And hydrology during a dry year. So we're looking at a 1 in 50 year drought condition for our reliable volume, and factoring in, right, the priority of other senior users on the source to come up with our reliable overall volume per watershed, as indicated there. The bottom two lines of the left-hand table, I've shown in gray specifically because we're not currently able to use those water rights because we don't have the infrastructure in place to divert them. Those are both the municipal reservation with the 1985 priority date and the Mystic Lake municipal claim with a 1901 priority date are owned by the city of Bozeman. They're storage water rights for municipal purpose, but we don't have a reservoir, right? in place to be able to utilize those rights here currently. Now, back to our storage conversation that we had earlier, in the meeting. These two water rights, the reservation and the Mystic Lake Claim, are what the city is targeting for its aquifer storage and recovery concept, right? As our kind of initial approach to groundwater supply for the community. Those are extraordinarily valuable in a closed basin because they are existing water rights available for municipal purpose. And I cannot stress how important and valuable that is here. Of all the water rights that have been claimed in the Gallatin River Basin, 0.1% of them are available for municipal use on a full basis. 1 in 1,000 gallons, right, has been claimed or appropriated for municipal use in the Gallatin Basin. So the two existing storage rights are what we would target to support the aquifer storage and recovery project or concept, by moving those rights through some kind of process with the DNRC, yet to be fully hashed out. A change process will certainly be needed. We don't yet know whether there will be a complementary permitting process associated with that. The concept that the city, I have here at this point is simply to do a change in the point of diversion, right? To move the point of storage from where it's currently identified in those existing rights to the aquifer or an injection point to the aquifer. And then a secondary point of diversion further down valley, down gradient, to then take that water that we put into the ground, right, at the top of the aquifer, to extract it further down gradient. So the water that we put in up gradient would be the same water we take out down gradient. That's the concept, right? Whether that is classic aquifer storage and recovery or managed aquifer recharge, subject to debate, but the concept holds nonetheless, is what we're going to be working towards, and working with the DNRC to see if we can make it happen. So those two rights are very valuable for that purpose because they're existing rights, and we just need to figure out the process, with the DNRC to figure out how to put it to use. Recognize that's going to be challenging.
So is there a specified volume for the?
Yeah.
I thought from what I heard before that for Mystic, you have 6,000 acre feet storage, right?
Yes, that's correct. That's the main volume.
How about for the municipal
Reservation 600.
600?
Yeah, 609 to be exact. Yeah. Yeah, and the Mystic claim is currently being litigated through the adjudication, so I can't get into any further detail on where that case is going. But we think that we stand a good shot of having a viable municipal water right with storage component associated with it at the end of the adjudication. Obviously, we won't know the final answer until the court has rendered its decision on that case, but we think we're gonna have something coming out of it. So I know there's a lot there. Happy to take any questions. I'm better already have this.
My confusion is for Mystic Lake, you're looking at two different options then, either doing above ground storage, surface storage, or the possibility of pumping into underground groundwater storage. So
That's correct.
there are two different potentials to utilize something that you already have the rights for.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
And the aquifer storage and recovery concept, right, is subject to physical limitations of the aquifer, right? I don't yet know how much water it will accept. So we have to get through that investigation phase to be able to find that, right? The capability and capacity of the aquifer to accept this water. And then we know what remaining difference we have that could be utilized for surface storage.
Are you also considering both? I mean, you like.
Yeah.
You do like 1,000 feet of storage in the drainage and then 5,000. And you're not including one for the other.
No, not at all. Yeah. Yeah, very fungible between the two, whatever the volumes, can work out to be, given what we're able to, get permitted or authorized through the ASR project and the groundwater project. That's, yeah, what remaining volume would be available for other, storage. Awesome, Scott.
So if I hear you correctly, the city is currently pushing both of these opportunities equally to see which one is going to become viable, maybe both will be viable. And then at such time, if you can get the legalities worked out, then you would look at cost perspective as to one versus the other.
So on the surface storage in Sourdough, that project is not gonna move forward unless we got a affirmative, positive recommendation here from the TAC and the IWRP.
For the full, a single reservoir, you mean, or for either that or small units?
I would say any, impoundment storage.
Yeah.
There in Sourdough, yeah. Whatever flavor, this group is able to support. Yeah. Whether it be one big one or a series of smaller ones or,
Yeah.
something in
Yeah.
between.
Yeah.
We're kind of described, given, the strategy that we're working on. Given what we see with the ASR concept and the groundwater project, what can we then do with anything remaining, that this body would support?
I find it kind of interesting that on the one hand, I know there'd be a lot of resistance to new reservoir and sourdough. But at the same time, as we discussed earlier, I think everybody would agree, one of the most beneficial water structures we have in the entire basin is Highlight Reservoir. So,
Yeah. The people love highlight.
well, and as we've talked about it, I mean, we're supportive of it too, so, I mean, it's a useful way to manage water, and especially when you factor in the climate change issues, and it makes those storage options look a little more attractive for future planning.
Yeah.
It's just,
All right, Danny, well, you keep coming back, I'm gonna keep giving you homework. So if you could write down, looking for you to review pages 12 through 20 in the PDF that was sent out. That's appendix B in the beginning of the IWRP 2013, just after the executive summary.
so can you see those pages?
Yep, 12 through 20.
But sadly, the IWRP doesn't have page numbers,
Yeah.
so, which lesson learned.
Yeah.
So it's like the 12th page.
From the very beginning.
Page.
Does the cover count?
Content.
Executive summary.
Yes, the cover does count.
Okay. So we'll be, as you read that, please ponder what alternative should be considered. We've had a few meetings on these. I think there's some fan favorites coming out of these. I'm not hearing any terrible disagreement about any that should be definitely left out, but
So Lyman,
I'm sorry.
Lyman,
Yeah, okay.
it sounds like.
Well, it's tapped out.
Yeah.
So it is what it is.
We completed that optimization
Yeah.
project.
Yeah, so we're windowing down. Good job, guys. And then thinking about those evaluation criteria should be considered, and also how they should be weighted. This is the technical group, so we're gonna apply members to these things, so we can get a scientific figure coming out of these and help guide our decisions. So that is what we'll leave you with. The next meeting is, middle of October, right here at 11 a.m. Without objection, I'll close by just thanking the committee and apologize for being late. Hydraulic problems on the ground are better than hydraulic problems in the air, so I'm glad they returned it to the gate. And then also, just wanted to say, Griffin, I'm sorry if I was abrupt in trying to get things going on. I felt like I cut you off pretty strong there, and I'm sorry.
Okay.
Okay.
We were still kind of spoiled because at the beginning, Jessica mentioned we had lots of time.
You did lots of time.
I wanted to,
But here's the good news, is that, and I, Zach said it, and it's true, and Nate echoed it during talk and know, like, this is exactly the types of conversations we want to have. We are finding a balance there between covering a lot of material, but also getting a lot of good input for, the consultants to work through. So I'm feeling like this is a pretty good balance. If you guys have any suggestions for improvement or adjusting the balance, I'm all ears and available at any time. I feel like we are making good progress and the point of this group is being fulfilled. So thank you all.
Well, I will say, I think that some of our previous discussion that we kind of revolved around actually was dealing with issues that had been brought up by the city after. So it wasn't like that was necessarily rushed and they didn't have a chance to talk about it because it had already been talked about. So it was all, in my mind, dovetailing together extremely well. So,
Thank you.
do we have a date for November yet? I'm just waiting.
Wednesday?
Wednesday, so the 19th.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it's the 40th. Yeah.
Okay.
That is correct, it's the 19th.
Yeah, just thinking
Turkey.
family plans and yeah.
It's not ideal, but there is always the option to join virtually. Like, if you happen to get the pinch, we be able to make 3 hours, but not 3 hours plus drive time or whatever. There's certainly accommodations that we're willing to make sure you can participate. So. Meeting adjourned.
Like when you always can, someone